in eastern Ukraine, the US has now imposed a series of limited sanctions on the two Russian-backed areas in eastern Ukraine's Donbas region. The move came after President Putin signed a presidential decree recognizing the independence of the separatist regions in eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk. US President Joe Biden signed an executive order on Monday imposing penalties which target these two particular Moscow-backed breakaway regions. The executive order bars any kind of new investment and trade from the United States with people living in Ukraine's Donetsk People's Republic along with Luhansk People's Republic. The recognition of the separatist regions had triggered international condemnation and a promise of broader targeted sanctions from the US and the European Union. Washington, meanwhile, has also said that it will impose another set of fresh sanctions on Moscow, which will be unveiled later today. All this comes following an initially cautious response to President Putin's order of deploying Russian troops to these rebel-held regions.
Tomorrow, the United States will impose sanctions on Russia for this clear violation of international law and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We can, will, and must stand united in our calls for Russia to withdraw its forces, return to the diplomatic table, and work toward peace.
The West has repeatedly threatened to impose far-reaching sanctions against Russian energy firms, banks, all targeting its economy. It was unclear, however, if the deployment of Russian troops in Moscow-backed enclaves would be seen by Washington as an invasion. A senior US official pointed out that Russian forces had been acting covertly in the area for about 8 years. Now, for more insights, joining us now live from Berlin is Ben Aris, the editor-in-chief and founder of BNE IntelliNews. Ben, thanks so much for joining us on Beyond World is One.
Nice to be here.
So my first question to you, there's a lot of talks ongoing about what's exactly happening in the Ukraine conflict. A day after the Russian President Putin ordered troops into Ukraine's two controversial separatist regions, Moscow even says that the Russian foreign minister was still ready for talks with the US Secretary of State Blinken. So what do you make of these mixed signals? What exactly does Russia want?
I think it's very clear. I mean, from the beginning, Putin's made it perfectly clear that he wants a new security deal, part of that being a guarantee that Ukraine cannot join NATO ever. And the first round of talks, the demands came out in December, and the first round of talks started in January in Geneva. However, that relatively civilized round of diplomacy has gone nowhere. That the Americans came back at the end of that month saying flat no to Russia's main demand. And parallel to that, Macron has led an EU round of diplomacy where the emphasis shifted to implementing this Minsk II peace agreement, which specifically is aimed at bringing peace to the Donbass, which has been destabilized because Russia's covertly put troops into there.
Right.
What we're seeing now is that round is coming to an end. And so Putin has escalated. He's turned up the temperature by declaring that they're going to recognize the independence and hiving off a chunk of Ukraine, or at least threatening to, and moreover now overtly admitting Russian troops acting on what is seen as Ukrainian territory.
Right, absolutely. Now, Ben, I want to talk about this talk of sanctions. The United States and its European allies are all set to announce harsher, fresh sanctions against Russia. But just a few days ago, we heard the Ukrainian President Zelensky talk about the futile efforts of sanctions from the West. He said that if the West is in fact scared that Russia could attack Ukraine at any time, then sanctions are not sufficient. So will these sanctions work, especially after Russia's recent activity?
I think the short answer is no. The sanctions are a very inefficient and limited tool, in so much as that Putin's been preparing for this fight, by my reckoning, about 14 years. And specifically, he's built up enormous currency reserves, $630 billion, far in excess of what the country needs. And at the same time, he's paid down his external debt and also sold off his American treasury bills. And what all of that means is that the West has no leverage over Russia. There's nothing much they can do to force Russia to do anything. They cannot collapse the economy. So the sanctions are symbolic. They should be imposed.
Right.
But in terms of being a tool to force Putin to do anything, they're fairly ineffective. And Zelensky's right in that sense. From his perspective, Zelensky's saying, let us join NATO. That's really the only solution. That's the only thing that's going to guarantee our security, because we're not going to be able to stop what just happened yesterday, where Russian troops arrive on what still is internationally recognized Ukrainian sovereign territory.
Just wrapping up our discussion here, Ben, is this Russia's recent moves as well as the retaliation from the West, the threat of more sanctions, is this another clear escalation of the crisis? We've seen weeks of diplomacy fail to achieve a breakthrough, especially after European leaders gathering. So what lies ahead?
Absolutely. I'm convinced that Putin's not going to back down. As I say, I think he's been preparing for this particular fight for a decade. It's his big legacy issue, is to settle the status of Ukraine. And that he's just escalated dramatically, but it's still a step short of invasion. It's still a step short of war or open conflict. However, if this move fails to produce any results in terms of getting his security deal, then he will escalate again. And, it could end up as a hot war, and then the West would have to do a peace deal, and part of that deal might be the security deal he wants. So this is not going to go away, and unless there's a deal, it could only get worse.
Ben Aris, thank you so much for all those insights, and thanks for joining us on Beyond World is One.
Pleasure.
Beyond